Hi, David.
Hello, Miriam.
Hi, David. Today we're going to talk through a case study of one of your clients who needed to cut costs with their suppliers. We're going to find out how you save them substantial amounts of money and also what others can learn from this case study. So, first of all, why don't you give us a little bit of background? What kind of company was it? What were they buying?
Okay, this company was a producer of industrial ceramics based in the UK. Quite a lot of their raw materials were being procured from overseas, in predominantly Africa and some other third world countries. And they were very reliant on exchange rate and shipping costs and commodity prices as to what the final price they paid delivered to their site.
So, what was the exact problem that they encountered?
Well, they needed to take cost out because they're under pressure from their customers and also their competitors, predominantly in Europe, were able to offer products of a similar quality but at a much lower price. So it's essential that we took prices out of the raw material costs.
So, what did you do? How did you solve this problem for them?
Okay, well, we had a look at the total cost of the raw material and what it was made up of, which elements were potentially negotiable and which parts weren't. And we honed in on the shipping costs. Shipping costs represented somewhere in the region of 15 to 20% of the cost of the raw material. And the company was buying in the material CIF, in other words, carriage and insurance freight paid, delivered to a UK port. And by some analysis and looking at market rates, we were able to look at re-engineering the shipping costs so that the client bought the materials free on board. In other words, the material was put in the container and put on the vessel in Africa, and then the client was responsible for the freight costs and bringing the material up from a UK port up to their factory.
So, in essence, the client took ownership of the
Yeah,
materials earlier.
that's right. The client took ownership. So some of that, there was obviously taking a bit more ownership of the product from source. So there was a little bit more work involved, but the amount of work involved was far more beneficial than for the savings that were being delivered. So we're able to take out about 10% savings of the total cost of the product just by changing the way that the client was buying its freight.
And the client didn't mind having to handle the shipping.
No, it's relative. Once you've set it up and once you understand what you're doing, it is then fairly straightforward. It's all about dealing with yourself, the shipping line, and the freight forwarders. It's not particularly difficult, but one of the risks one of the costs has an impact on cash because the client has to let go of its cash earlier, has to pay for the material when it goes on the ships from Africa rather than paying for the material when it lands in the UK.
So, David, what can other companies learn from this? What should they be taking away?
Well, they should really look at the cost of the products that they're buying from their suppliers and try to break them down into their cost components and look at each cost component and try to do some research to see which elements of the cost component they potentially can negotiate and influence and which parts are going to be very difficult to get any cost out. And by that way, you then got something to go back to the suppliers and negotiate about and finding room for manoeuvre so that there's a win-win. So the supplier can maybe maintain its margin on the product, but you can take cost out by affecting the other costs that make up the full cost components of the materials you're buying.
So, not just to look at the whole picture, but to look at every stage of the process.
Look at every stage of the product or services you're buying and try to break it down into the various cost components.
Okay. So that sounds like a terrific result for the client. They saved 10%. What difference did this ultimately make to their business?
Well, with their raw material costs representing about 80% of their manufacturing costs, taking 10% of their main raw material cost had quite a significant impact upon their gross margin, which would enable them to start to enter into price discussions with their customers and able to either give discounts or to flex their pricing based upon volume. So they gave far better, giving the salesman far more ammunition to be able to deal with customers who are wanting price reductions in the finished product. So overall, the client was able to retain market share, not necessarily win any market share, but retain market share, and was able to retain their margin despite the reduction in sales prices. So it was a success.
It's quite an achievement simply by looking at the way that the products are delivered to them.
Yep.
That's terrific. Thank you very much, David.